Good evening or afternoon, and welcome to Elders Climate Action's third and final workshop, Writing for Change, in this summer series. I'm Mark Cook, and I have the honor of introducing Sarah Spengeman as today's presenter. Before I do that, however, you might be interested in how ECA recruits such wonderful speakers, so please allow me to briefly explain. I am one of three co-chairs of ECA's Education Committee. A second co-chair is Frances Stewart, who was one of our first presenter in this series. Frances also connected us to Sarah by way of a fellow climate activist from Eco America who runs a climate health ambassadors program that she and Frances are both part of. Marianne Krasny, our third education co-chair, is an ecology and natural resources professor at Cornell University. Marianne brought us Caroline Levine, also from Cornell, for the power of our personal stories, which was our previous workshop session. So it is community connections within and beyond ECA and the willingness of our presenters to partner with ECA that allows us to bring you such quality presenters. All three of our workshop presenters are extraordinary women. My education co-chairs are extraordinary women. Tomorrow, August 26th, is Women's Equality Day, commemorating the 1920 adoption of the 19th Amendment to the US Constitution, prohibiting denial of the right to vote on the basis of sex. So, happy Women's Equality Day tomorrow, and guys, real men, when we're at our best, are also feminists. By the way, next month's national call tackles voting restriction efforts. You probably have already read Sarah's impressive summary bio from ECA's prior communications about her and this workshop series, so I won't repeat. Like our other speakers, Sarah has taken her valuable time to correspond with us and prepare for today. Sarah is Deputy Director of Communications for Energy Innovation. She earned her master's and PhD in political science from the University of Notre Dame and completed a certificate program in climate change and health from the Yale School of Public Health. Sarah hosts the Hot Mamas podcast, interviewing mothers who are out front taking on powerful fossil fuel interests by day while trying not to drown in the laundry that never seems to stop at night. Sarah encourages her listeners to grab a glass of wine or cup of tea and hear from hot mamas across the country who share their very, very real struggles. Sarah's other efforts and experiences are too numerous to detail, but as ECA's own policy committee appreciates, her campaigns to make energy innovations policy analyses and conclusions more relatable to wider audiences, and that's no easy task. Before Sarah begins, we are going to have a brief questionnaire. I also believe we are planning 2 breakout sessions, so we encourage you to stay for those and maybe meet somebody new. So after this poll is presented, Sarah can begin her presentation. Thank you.
It looks like we're having some trouble with the poll, so we're just going to go ahead and skip that tonight.
No problem. Hello, everybody. I'm Sarah. My question for you all was if you've ever written an op-ed or LTE. So if you have, just say yes in the chat, and we can get a sense of how many people have done that. Awesome. That's so great. Looks like a lot of you have. And if you haven't ever before, you're in the exact place where you should be. That's great. Awesome. Good. Well, I feel very privileged to be with all of you tonight. There is nothing I enjoy more than spending time with fired up climate activists. So thank you so much for having me. And I was telling Mark and Jerry just before the webinar started that I definitely want to have some hot mamas from Elders Climate Action on my podcast coming up. So I just interviewed a grandma in my last episode. So let's get started. I'm going to try and share my PowerPoint. There we go. All right, can everybody see that? All right. So let's talk first of all about why write? Why should we do this? First of all, it's a way that you can have your voice heard loud and clear and call for climate action without even having to leave your house, just sitting at your computer. You can do it, at the time that's most convenient for you. If you're a night owl, you can write late into the night or right before you have your coffee if you're a morning person. It is also highly impactful. So the opinion section is actually still the most widely read section of the newspaper. And if you mention a policymaker by name, they're sure to see it. So if you mention your council member, your city council member by name, if you mention your senator by name, your House representative by name, they're sure to see it. They have staffers that are regularly searching the media for mentions of the name. And so they're absolutely guaranteed to see it and become aware of it. And then, of course, the reason we're all here, I like how my governor, Gavin Newsom, put it when he released an executive order calling for 100% electric vehicles by 2035, that we are in a climate damn emergency. We need to do everything we can and use all the tools at our disposal to solve the climate crisis and have our voices heard to demand climate action. And this is a really effective way to do that. So I just want to give an overview of what makes effective climate communication overall. And this you can apply to your writing, you can apply to your spoken communication, you can apply to your conversations with legislators. We know from all successful campaigns that what persuades policymakers, what persuades the public is simple messages, easily understood messages, clear messages that are repeated often. So they're reinforced often by a variety of trusted messengers, by people who have some kind of credibility. So simple, clear messages repeated often by a variety of trusted messengers. Has anybody heard this before? Yeah, okay, great. So what are those simple, clear messages about climate change? This is really the essence. This is climate communication in a nutshell. It's real, it's us, it's bad, it's solvable. So I'm going to go over each one of those in a bit more detail. So whenever we're talking about climate change and writing about climate change, we want to affirm that this is happening. Climate change is happening. And when I first got started writing about climate change, we weren't having as frequent extreme wildfires and as extreme cold snaps that we had, like we saw in Texas, or hurricanes. And so it was harder actually to connect the dots, and the science has gotten even better. We know that it's happening. So climate change is happening. You can point to the recent extreme weather. You can point to the consensus by the world's best climate scientists in the recent IPCC report. So it's real and it's us, it's human caused. So you can explain that really simply. Burning fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal for energy releases heat trapping gases, gases that trap heat in our atmosphere and heat up the planet. It's bad. We can look around and see this is harming everyone. It's harming vulnerable people first and worst. It's harming frontline communities first and worst. But there's no place that's truly safe anymore. And it's gonna get worse if we don't do something about it. You always want to emphasize the impacts on human beings, emphasize the effects on humans, not just to the ecosystem. And one of the reasons I got into this in the first place too was I'm an animal lover and I want to protect all of the Earth species. But in terms of effective communication, we know what persuades people is if they can feel that this might harm them. personally and affect them or their family. So you always want to put it in human terms. And then you always, and it's hard to do sometimes on our worst days, we want to project optimism that this is solvable, that we can do this. Doom and gloom turns people off and it leads them actually to inaction. We know from the studies in psychology that when people feel overwhelmed, they might say, yeah, this is a problem, but there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm going to just turn that part of my brain off and go about the rest of my day. If we want to actually move people from knowing climate change is real to acting to solve climate change, we have to say that we have the solutions, we have the technology, we know what policies work, and guess what? They come with major benefits to health, to the economy. And so always, always, always do your best to share real concrete solutions and a sense of possibility. Okay, this is another core element of good communication, is always thinking about who are you talking to? Who are you trying to persuade? Who is my audience? And we want to do that before we start writing, before we sit down and write. And we want to think, who are we trying to reach with our message? What are their values? You might have your own reasons for why you're working on climate change. But, that might, like I said, what brought me to thinking about this was thinking about animals and the impact on ecosystems. But that might not be what motivates somebody else. Others might be more motivated by financial security and knowing that, there are going to be more good paying jobs. So think about what would motivate them. Is it national security? We can talk about climate change in terms of national security. Is it the economy? Is it public health? So think about what are their values and what are the messages that are going to resonate most with them. You also, as you think about writing an opinion piece or a letter to the editor, what newspapers are they reading? So in my work, we want to influence policymakers. And so we try to get into newspapers that we know policymakers read, like The Hill in Washington, D.C., or the Washington Post, or Politico. So think about what are the newspapers or news sites that audience is regularly reading. And then, of course, make sure that you're targeting your messages to that audience and to the outlet that's going to reach them. I did want to say, if at any point you have questions, go ahead and feel free to pop them into the chat. The way my screen is shared, I can't see the chat. So I think I do have a Q&A section at the end, so we can just hold questions then. But if there's something that isn't clear, Mark, then can you bring that up to me if something I said isn't clear and it's a matter of clarity, but we can get into deeper questions at the end. Does that sound good? Okay. So let's talk about what makes a good op-ed. So let's talk really quickly about the difference between an opinion article and a letter to the editor. A letter to the editor is going to be that really short article. It's usually only about 200 words that you submit in response, usually to something that you saw in the newspaper. An op-ed, or an opinion editorial is what it stands for, is a longer opinion piece, usually for around 600 words to 800 words. And those are the columns you see in the opinion section that appear usually every day in major newspapers. So I want to talk first about an op-ed because the elements of a strong op-ed apply to an LTE as well. And when you think about a letter to the editor, it's really a truncated, shorter version of an op-ed, an abbreviated op-ed, if you will. And so we'll talk about that after we talk about op-eds. So what makes a good opinion? Timely. So making sure that you are tying your opinion piece to something that is newsworthy or that's currently happening, current events. And I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Make it personal. Bring in your personal story. I know that on the last workshop, you talked about personal stories, and an opinion piece is a way to bring in that personal story and share that personal story. And we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment as well. Make it factual. Include hard data, numbers, and facts, and make sure that all your facts are accurate and that you've got a source for those. And you can hyperlink those in your article. But it's very important if you say that, for instance, this is going to create jobs, that you point to some clear factual data that shows, yes, investments in clean energy or climate policy creates jobs. Or if you say, you know, this will clean our air, that you point to some real factual data that shows that, first of all, there's a problem with air pollution in your community, and then that this source is emitting pollution. So you want to make it personal, but you also want to make it factual. You want to make it simple. The best advice on that is to think about a 12-year-old. Maybe some of you have grandkids. Can you explain it to your 12-year-old granddaughter or grandson, or, you know, even a friend who knows nothing about the topic? So we've got to keep it super simple, super clear, super understandable. You know, climate change can seem confusing to folks if we use some of the jargon that's associated, like carbon emissions and greenhouse gases. So just talk about heat trapping gases. You know, try to think of a way to describe it in a way that's just super simple and clear, and avoid any what I call wonky terms. And I'm always trying to work with my analysts that I work with at my job to de-wonkify their op-eds, because it's full of technical jargon. You want to anticipate objections to your position, but don't repeat the opponent's claims. Don't give your opponent a platform in your writing. Instead, what you want to do is think, what might a person's objection to this be? They might say, this is a job killer, or they might say, this is, you know, this is a waste of taxpayer dollars. Try to anticipate that, and instead of reiterating and reinforcing that, just put in the response. This will create 100,000 new jobs across the country. And so respond without reinforcing the objection. Whenever you can, to improve understandability and clearly communicate, use equivalencies or metaphors. So in an op-ed I recently wrote, I talked about how a clean electricity standard, the studies show, would save 50,000 lives. And so when you use a big number like that, it's really helpful to give people a mental picture of what that means. So I just did some Googling and found out, well, that's the same number of people that can fit into the Yankee Stadium. So that's what I said. I said it would save 50,000 lives, the same number of people that could fit into Yankee Stadium, and help create that mental picture. You can also use metaphors to help create that mental picture as well. So in an op-ed one of my colleagues wrote, he was talking about natural gas and how power plants and utilities aren't quitting natural gas. And he used the metaphor of a smoker who knows it's good for him to stop smoking, but he just can't give it up. And I thought that was a really powerful metaphor. And then we talked about always being focused on solutions. So benefits, benefits, benefits. Don't just talk about the bad things that would happen if we don't do this. Really focus on all the good things that will come if we do adopt this action. And that's the final point, is always include a very clear, a very specific call to action. It's great to get people fired up and say, we need climate action. We need to act on climate. Okay, well, what do I do? And so we want to tell our policymakers, you need to pass this bill, or you need to invest more dollars in this program. We want to be really specific about what we need. So let's talk now about that timely hook. This is your opening to your op-ed. So it's what's going to help both the editor recognize that this is a timely, important topic, as well as your reader be enticed to read it. So a timely hook, how do you want to hang your op-ed? What event do you want, what hook do you want to hang your op-ed on? It could be a new report or a study, like the IPCC report that came out. It could be an event. It could be like the COP26 meeting coming up, or it could be an event like Mother's Day or Grandparents' Day, actually, is a great hook. It could be extreme heat, extreme cold, weather, a storm, a flood. It could be a holiday or an anniversary. A lot of people write op-eds, of course, around Earth Days, but think also maybe about the anniversary of the Clean Air Act or Endangered Species Act. Political development. This is always a great hook. You know, Congress is back in session and they're looking at a specific piece of legislation or an upcoming political decision. So what I thought we could do now is actually, let me give you a couple of examples before we go into our breakout. So this was an op-ed, the op-ed that I mentioned that I wrote, where I used the example of the Yankee Stadium. And I wrote this with a friend of mine, and we were calling for climate legislation in Congress. And we opened our op-ed saying, we don't have to look further than the weather app on our phones to understand why climate change poses such a risk to health. Air quality alerts were issued last week across the country, from California to New York, due to smoke from the wildfires raging in Canada and the West. So we are tying it to the smoke event, if you recall, from a few weeks ago, that actually was, you know, as far as Manhattan and Washington, D.C. Here's another one that is beautifully done. This one was in CNN just a week ago or so. It says, I live in a valley surrounded by jagged mountains, the kind that attract the Winter Olympics. This weekend, wildfire smoke was so thick, it blotted them out completely, making Utah look like the Great Plains. The sun was reduced to a pinhole of hellish red, and anyone who stepped outside felt their chest close, and some went to the hospital. So beautiful imagery there as well, harrowing imagery, but also tying it to a real specific event that was happening where he lived. So those were two based on smoke, but think about any kind of event that you could tie your op-ed to. So this is a good point, I thought, now to put people in breakout rooms. And what you would do is just give each person a chance to brainstorm at least one hook for an op-ed. And it could be something that's coming up, or could be a past hook that you might have used in a previous one, or it could be something that you'd use right now. So let's give everybody in the group 2 minutes, and then we'll come back.
Give me 1 second and I will get everybody in a breakout room.
Thanks, Jen.
We'll open the rooms in just a second.
Sarah, there's lots of hooks out there these days.
I know.
All
Good.
right.
It looks like
We're all back.
people are coming back. Okay. Before I share my screen again, I thought what we could do is, if you thought of a hook, just type it in the chat, and I'd love to see what you all came up with. And you're right. Unfortunately, sometimes there's more extreme weather hooks lately.
I had a question.
Oh, sure.
Newspapers, I mean, I read the Washington Post every day, unfortunately, but I understand that most young people don't even read the newspaper. So are there other ways, like blogs or some other way we could insert our information into like Facebook? But Facebook is so broad, unless you created a group. I don't know these things, but I'm just saying newspapers are read by people like me or us, but a lot of people don't.
Yeah, so most newspapers these days have an online version. And so that's really where you're gonna see most readership these days, is looking at the online version. And a lot of younger people get their news from the online sources rather than print newspapers. And at the end of this presentation, I'm gonna talk about how you can really amplify your opinion or LTE through social media. So there's ways to make sure that people see it.
Yeah, I was thinking that. Okay. So
Yeah.
the same rules apply then, whatever the technology is.
Exactly. So we'll get to that. Someone asked, what is an LTE? I'm sorry. Letter to the editor. It's a letter to the editor. So I'm seeing some good hooks here. So hurricanes, smoke coming into Las Vegas Valley from California wildfires. Yep. The year we couldn't breathe. Is that a book or an article? Whoever wrote that one?
She came up with that.
Oh, okay. Oh, I like that. I see. That's the, oh, you know what? That's a great title for an op-ed. The recall election of the governor, critical bill in Sacramento. Let's see. Severe drought, record-setting rains, a demonstration. That's great. Yeah, these are all really, really strong hooks. Really, if you think about it, anything could be tied to climate change once you start thinking about it. So just start thinking about, anything that how it could relate to climate change. You can really create a hook. I mean, it could be Valentine's Day and you talk about, your love for the place that you live, or your love for your partner, or your love for your grandchildren, and why that's so important to you, and tie that into climate change. So really think about, try to be creative and think about what you can come up with. All right, so now I'm gonna share my screen again. Okay. People see my PowerPoint? Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing my own PowerPoint. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay. Okay. We did our breakout. Okay, so now we're going to talk about making it personal. So if you attended the last workshop in this series, and if this will really resonate. And if you didn't, I encourage you to go back and watch the video because it was an outstanding workshop. So making it personal. One of the elements of a strong opinion, a written opinion, is credibility of the author. And editors, when they're looking for what to publish on the opinion section, they want to print articles that are coming from somebody who has a good reason to give that perspective and to offer that recommendation. It also helps reach the heart of your audience, and people are moved more by personal stories than they are only by concrete numbers or figures. And you learned that hopefully in your last workshop. So when you're thinking about how to weave in my story, how to make it personal, you want to think about, why do you care about this issue? Why do you care about climate change? And then think about, what experience do you have as an individual in your life, in your past experience or now, that is relevant? Think about what special, unique perspective you bring. Maybe you were a physician or are a physician. Maybe you are a teacher, you're a grandfather, you've been a business owner or a mechanic or a lifelong union member. Think about what perspective you bring. It could be as an individual, it could be thinking about your family, something that affects your family. And it could be, don't think only about, maybe negative impacts, think about positive benefits as well. So think, as an individual, is there some experience or event in your life that you have that's relevant? Has your family been affected, your children or grandchildren? And then again, like I said, think about benefits. So have you maybe leased an EV and it's saved you a lot of money at the gas pump because you don't need to have gas anymore? Or maybe you could benefit from this policy if it was enacted. So it doesn't have to be a benefit that you're experiencing now, a tangible benefit that you have now. It could be a benefit that could come. So for instance, if a policy was passed to provide subsidies for investments in home weatherization to increase the efficiency of homes, that could really help, especially retired people on fixed incomes with their rising energy bills. So think about something that could potentially benefit you as well. And then another core element of an opinion or LTE is having a strong call to action. You want to give very clear instructions about what you want your policymakers or your audience to do. My daughter is 3 years old and she's just always saying, help me, mommy, help me, mommy. And I'm saying, I'm here to help you, but what exactly do you want me to do? And I'm trying to, do you want me to put the block here or put the block there? Because she'll get very upset if I do it wrong. So I've been trying to encourage her to give me a clear call to action. So think about what exactly is the policy or the action that you're calling for. It's great to say we need to have climate solutions, but you have to say, what are those specific solutions? So, make it as specific as possible. Is it air purifiers for school? Is it an ordinance, a city ordinance, or a county measure, maybe that would invest in green spaces in your community? And then name names. Who has the power to make that change? And it doesn't need to be, negative. You're urging them to take an action that would be good for their constituents, the people that they represent. The other thing I want to mention, I knew I had one more thought about that before I move on, is think too about praising actions that policymakers have taken. So a lot of times we think about calling our representatives out for not doing things. But the representatives who do take bold action on climate, they need just as much support for taking that action as well. So when we get to LTEs, that's a great place to also say, I strongly support something that was just passed, or I strongly support President Biden's 100% clean energy by 2035 goal, for instance. Okay, so we're gonna do another breakout. And in this breakout, now you're gonna do a bit more brainstorming, and you're gonna brainstorm a bit about what's your personal perspective that you would bring. What is that? Is it, an experience, a past profession, a relationship, a benefit? And then you're also gonna think about, okay, what might be a call to action that I would be calling for? And, be creative. This doesn't have to be something real, just brainstorm different ideas so that you're getting the sense of what a good call to action would be, or what a personal story would be. Does that make sense? Any questions before we go into the breakout? Because I know there's a bit of confusion last time. Cool. All right, go ahead, Jen.
All right, I am opening the rooms now, so go ahead and accept the invitation on your screen.
Welcome back, everybody. I also went through and read some more of your hooks, and there's some really great ones. I love, Kathy also had a great one for Valentine's Day, much better than mine, which was about how fine particulates in the air are getting into the bloodstream and contributing to heart disease. That's a great one. Okay, so let's now pop into the chat. First, let's do, what would be how would you make it personal? What's your unique perspective? Just, it could be, a word like teacher, or it could be a sentence. Let's see what you came up with. Nurse, yeah. Talking about health, public health impact of climate change. Child experience with asthma. Oh yeah, someone has family members whose house is burned in Santa Rosa. I'm so sorry to hear that. Oh wow, wow. Former mayor of Paradise. Faith leader, very powerful connection to faith. Looking around and seeing dead lawns all over your neighborhood on your walk. Mm-hmm. Someone said that they have solar panels. Great. Generationally, yep. What's our legacy? Yeah. Just looking at this comment thread, I can see a lot of people have had direct impacts from climate change. These are all excellent, excellent, powerful, compelling. They would connect with people's hearts, and I think be very moving, and also add to the credibility of your opinion piece. All right, now let's take a minute and add in, what's your call to action? What are you going to tell people to do specifically? Concrete action. Build Back Better Act now. Yes. Someone was talking about her personal story of being a grandmother. Yep. Start a local climate group. Okay. Fund electric buses, mass transportation, energy audits, pass bills to close leaking oil wells, subsidies to homeowners for firewise their properties. Okay, good. So I want you to think, as you're writing your opinion piece, what is it that I want? What's the change that needs to happen? And what's the specific policy or action that's going to bring about that change? And who is responsible for making those decisions? Who holds the power to make that happen? And mention them by name and say, I urge council member, I urge the mayor, I urge my state assembly member to vote this way. All right, good. Okay, so let's talk now a bit about the structure of an op-ed. And I always encourage people to do an outline. An outline really helps you clearly organize your argument and your points, and it helps really bring clarity for me to create a clear structure and a piece that flows together. Let me share my screen again. Oops, I think I'm sharing my screen maybe and not my PowerPoint. 1 second. Try again. There we go. All right, everybody see that? Okay, great. So let me make it bigger now. All right, so this is the basic structure for an opinion piece, whether it's an op-ed or a letter to the editor. A letter to the editor would be much shorter. As I said, about 200 words, but it would have the same basic structure. So the first thing, oops, going back. First thing you want to have in your introduction is your hook. So what's timely? All of the things that you mentioned, you know, there's a bill upcoming. Congress right now is considering an infrastructure package. And then you want to preview your argument. So give a bit of a sense of what's coming for the reader and say what you want to happen right there in the introduction. If not the intro paragraph, in the next paragraph. And I'm going to give you an example, a really good example to help show you how this is done. In your first or second paragraph, right away, you want to explain some background about why this matters. Why do we need electric school buses? Or why do we need cleaner transportation? Or why do we need investments in fire-wise houses, for instance? You can provide a bit of background, just a couple of sentences about how we got to this point where we are now. To help any reader who is not familiar with the issue. So you always, when you're writing an op-ed, imagine someone who knows nothing about the topic. Don't assume any knowledge on the part of your reader. You're educating them about this topic and helping them learn about it and to understand what should be done about it. So provide a little bit of background to help with that. Then you want to follow through in your remaining paragraphs with supporting points that give good, strong reasons for why this action needs to happen. And that could be your experience. For instance, someone talked about being a grandmother with some grandchild with asthma. We need to have electric school buses because my granddaughter has asthma, and there's, 10% of all children in her school district also have asthma. So you can use your personal story and experience as that evidence, as that credibility to support why you're calling for this action. But in addition to your personal experience, add data and concrete specific numbers when and wherever you can. And you want to have really no more than 3 or 4 core reasons for calling for the specific action that you're calling for. And then under each one of those reasons, provide evidence for those reasons. And I'm going to, again, give you an example. I think it'll be easier to understand when I show you an example. And then at the end, you're always going to have your strong final paragraph that says, and this is what we need to do. And this is why our representatives have to pass the Build Back Better Act. And again, be specific and name names. So let's go through a recent op-ed that I think follows this organization really well. Can everybody see that? Okay, so this is an op-ed that was recently published in the Las Vegas Sun by a teacher named Selena Torres, and it's called Move to Electric School Buses Would Be Wise by Selena Torres. And you can, when you get the PowerPoint, you can go ahead and link to read the full thing at the full opinion piece at this website. And so I only pulled in some clips. I didn't pull in the full op-ed. And we're going to go through, though, I think some of the important elements of her op-ed that makes it a strong op-ed. So, whoops, going back. Go back. There we go. She starts off with a strong hook that makes it timely. Just put in the chat for, if you've caught it. What's the hook that she's using there? What's the timely event? It's just the start of the school year, right? So, you can bring that into a lot of different, I think, topics about climate change. And she says, many are looking forward to seeing their classmates once again, but students with asthma are planning how best to avoid a severe attack from the toxic and climate-inducing fumes from diesel school buses, excuse me. That's a sentence in her first paragraph, and she has another sentence, but the first sentence of her second paragraph right away previews her main argument, previews her main call to action. She says, bold leadership by Congress this summer could secure an infrastructure bill to help Nevada transition to clean electric buses and protect students' health. So she's got a specific call to action there. Congress can pass an infrastructure bill that will invest in clean electric buses. And what's the benefit? It's going to protect students' health. So she's focusing on the benefits there. Then her next paragraph is her own personal story. Growing up with asthma was an excruciating experience that left me deciding between staying inside during recess or risking the pain and embarrassment of getting an asthma attack while playing outside with friends. That's just one sentence, but isn't it beautifully done the way she really poignantly captures her experience with asthma and the hard choices it left her with? So that's her beginning first couple of paragraphs, and then let's look at the body of her opinion piece. Then she goes into her reasons for why she's calling for electric buses. She says that buses powered by diesel, they spew pollution into our neighborhoods. Then she uses some facts to back that up. Pollution inside these kinds of emitting vehicles could be as much as 10 times ambient levels. So she's got her story, her personal story, but then she's using hard facts and data to back up that personal experience. The one edit I would have for her if I was her editor would be, can you say it a bit more simply than ambient levels? I would have said, just say 10 times higher than the air outside the bus. I would have said it a bit more simply. Then she cites a really good resource, the American Lung Association's State of the Air Report, which gave her county an F for air quality. So again, more evidence to support her point. And then she pivots to talk about, well, where can we go from here? What would be the benefit of this? Switching from diesel to electric school buses could prevent 5.3 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and it could better serve students without producing harmful pollution. So she's talking about the benefits of this policy that she's calling for. And then she's thinking about her audience. She's thinking, well, what is going to persuade people? Is it only going to be air pollution? Is it only going to be greenhouse gas emissions reductions? Probably not. And what might be some objections to the policy I'm calling for? So she's anticipating those objections. She's not naming them, but there might be somebody who would say, well, then what about the job losses for we're taking away buses that run on diesel? You know, the people that manufacture those buses, are they going to lose their jobs? What about people at the gas station? What about maintenance on those buses and the mechanics? She's anticipating that argument and she's responding to it without reinforcing it and naming it. She says, the demand for electric vehicles will create thousands of new, good-paying jobs in clean energy manufacturing, critical as our economy bounces back from the pandemic. And then she closes with her clear call to action. Let's urge Congress to act now to prioritize students' health and direct federal investments to jumpstart the transition to electric school buses. So I encourage you to read the full op-ed, you know, keep it handy as an example of an op-ed that does a really nice job of following that structure of what makes a powerful and compelling op-ed. Okay, so you've written your op-ed, now what? Before you send, have a friend or family member read it and review it and give you some feedback. Like I said, make sure that it's clear and understandable to somebody who really knows very little about the topic. So try to find a friend who really doesn't know anything about that policy or maybe even about climate change, or ask your 12-year-old granddaughter will really get a kick out of proofreading grandma's opinion piece. So think about having at least one other person review it and give you feedback. It's always important. I call it fresh eyes. When you've read something over and over again yourself, you miss mistakes, you miss errors. So it's always good to have fresh eyes. And then revise it. So go back and always think of your first written product as a first draft. You're always going to go back and revise it. Make sure you do a spell check. And then if you've talked about, for instance, the state of the art report, hyperlink to that if you can. That means you select your text and you insert a link. And a lot of editors of newspapers really like to be able to make sure that you've cited your sources, and that's the best way to do it. Okay, so now how do you get published? Okay, so we call this pitching an op-ed. So basically pitching an op-ed means making your case to the editor that they should print it, that they should publish it. So first of all newspapers have online an opinion section, and it usually somewhere on that page has submission guidelines. Sometimes you have to go to the bottom of the newspaper's website and click on contact, but somewhere on that website, there's going to be clear instructions. And you want to pay very careful attention to the instructions because you don't want to give them a reason to reject it. And if it's a little too long, it's over the word count, it's not citing a source in the way they want you to do it, they may just pass it up. So please make sure that you read those instructions carefully. And every newspaper has, slightly different instructions. So follow them carefully. Sometimes they want you to email them. Sometimes they want you to cut and paste them into a submission form. So make sure you pay attention to those instructions. And then newspapers want to print original content. So it's a major no-no to go around and share your op-ed with every newspaper hoping someone will pick it up. Unfortunately, we have to share the op-ed with one newspaper at a time. And so when you pitch an op-ed, you can even say that, this is my first choice of publication, or I'm sharing this exclusively with the East Bay News or whatever it is. And then you have to wait either until, they say no, or sometimes what you can do is follow up and say, if I haven't heard from you by the end of today, I'll assume you have passed and I'll share it with another outlet. And that's fair to do as well. When you send your email or your submission form, try to have an eye-catching subject that really gets at the heart of your piece. So something like electric school buses could save children's lives. Something that's kind of attention grabbing and gets that editor who's going to get many submissions to think, oh, I should open this email. It also should be short. Opinion editors are very, very busy. They get lots and lots of submissions. So don't expect them to read a very long, in-depth, detailed email. You want to do your elevator pitch for, why this is an article, an opinion piece that they should publish. So you want to say why readers should care. So remember, we talked about your hook. That's where you bring in your hook too and say, Congress is just about to pass an infrastructure bill. This is a timely piece because it calls on Congress to pass that infrastructure package that includes funding for electric vehicle buses. Excuse me, I need some water. My throat gets dry after talking too much. Or you could say, with the recent wildfires, my family's home was threatened. This piece says that we have to rapidly reduce emissions in order to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. So bring in your hook. And then your call to action. What exactly is the thrust, the main argument of your opinion piece? What is that? What is the opinion of the opinion piece? Bring that in. Always include a sentence or two about who you are, that personal, what makes you credible on this source as a former teacher or as a physician or, as a homeowner. And then say, this is the reason why I'm sharing this piece, and provide that bio, anything that would add to your credibility as an author or your authority on that topic. And then after you've said, thank you so much for your consideration, you've got to, excuse me, sorry, I'm missing a bullet. Make sure you copy and paste the full text. Don't just attach a Word document. You should attach a Word document, but don't only do that. Cut and paste and put it below your signature so they could easily skim it. So you just want to make it as easy as possible for the opinion editor. And then if you haven't heard back in about 48 hours, it's recommended that you actually check in, send a short email. I wanted to see if you'd been able to look at my opinion piece. Again, just reiterate even more quickly. I think it's very timely because of this reason. And I'm looking forward to hearing back from you. And if I don't hear back from you by the end of the day, I'll assume you have passed on the piece and we'll submit it to another paper. The thing I want to encourage you to do is start making a connection with the editor, the opinion editor of your local paper. When you submit an op-ed for the first time, you can also make a phone call. And share a little bit about who you are and try to build that connection, because the more you're connected, the more say they know what elders climate action is, the more likely they are to publish your piece. So that's why also, if they publish your piece, you always want to say thank you. You always want to send a follow-up and say thank you. So let's talk quickly now about letters to the editor. So this is a much shorter opinion piece. So an opinion piece would be 600 to 800 words usually, and a letter to the editor is super short, 150 to 200 words usually max, super short. It's usually responding to something that has been published already in the newspaper, an article that's already been published, and you're replying to that essentially. Because of that, you want to submit it really, really quickly. So usually around 24 hours after the article was published, if possible. Again, you want to make it personal. So bring in your experience, have your facts, and have your clear call to action. And LTEs, I think, are a great way to show support. So if there's a news article covering a climate policy or climate action that was positive, that you support, the public needs to know that, because there are going to be critics out there criticizing that policy. So if something good has happened, let's applaud it, let's celebrate it. And if you see an article published about that recent legislation being passed, write in an LTE and say why this policy is going to bring great benefits and why you support it. So I'm going to run through a quick example again. From one of your members, I thought was a great one. This is from Christine Berg. Christine, I don't know if you're on the call, but thank you for sharing this LTE with me so I could use it as an example. So what you do in an LTE is you want to, in your first sentence, usually mention the article that you're responding to. So she does that here. She says, the July 7th editorial, an attack on regional I don't know, whenever I touch my mouse by accident, it keeps moving around. Okay, there we go. Play down the seriousness of the environmental crisis. So you can also use a letter to the editor to respond to an opinion that was published in the opinion section. That's what she's doing here. And then she's responding to another one, to the July 4th article, climate change has become dangerous and deadly. It'll get worse, stated that heat wave gripping the Pacific Northwest is much worse than any of climate models projected. So then she says, action is urgent. So right away, she's calling for action. Then she gives some really clear facts. Transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. It's one of the largest sources of microplastics. The planned public-private partnership will add more lanes for more traffic. So again, she's thinking about what's going to resonate with people. Is it only going to be cuts and pollution? Probably not. But you know what pisses a lot of people off and frustrates a lot of people? Traffic. So she's getting to that. And then she's saying, instead, let's build mass transit that will get us our goal of lower greenhouse gas emissions, lower the environmental impact. And then she talks also about the health impacts of climate change. And she says she's an oncologist. So connecting to, you know, her personal experience as a physician. And then she has her clear call to action. We've got to seize the moment, build a transit system that has the least climate and environmental impact possible, and that gets us safely where we need to go. So very short and sweet, powerful, brings in her personal credibility, brings in facts and data, thinks about, you know, what her audience what will resonate with her audience. Okay, so say your LTE gets published, your opinion piece gets published. Yay, this is so exciting, but your job isn't done yet. You want to thank the editor, send a personal note and say, thank you for publishing it, because that relationship is important. It could pave the way for another member of Elders Climate Action to submit an opinion piece and have it get accepted, because the editor will say, hey, these folks from Elders Climate Action, they're really nice. You know, they really care. They're a credible organization. And I recognize the name, and these people I have a good relationship with them. Then you want to maximize the impact of this opinion piece. So send it, blast it out to all your networks. Everybody who's on this call, you know, if you publish an LT or an opinion piece, you should share it with every other member of Elders Climate Action so that they can share it with their networks and really magnify the impact. Share it on social media, share it on your Facebook, use hashtags. A hashtag that's being used a lot right now to get Congress to adopt a lot of climate provisions in the infrastructure package and budget package is Act Now, hashtag Act Now. So use a hashtag so that other folks will see it. And then send it in an email to your policymakers, to your representatives, send it to your city council member, send it to your state legislative rep, send it to your member of Congress's office in a short email, and you know, just a brief summary of what you've written about, and then cut and paste below your signature. And also, if you're affiliated with any other organizations, share it with them as well, and ask them to share it on their social media channels as well. Okay, so I think we still managed to have some time for questions. I think so. So I'm going to stop share. And if you want to type in any questions to the chat, you can do that. Or I think it's, you know, a small enough group that if you want to unmute yourself, that's fine too. So what about LTEs critiquing other LTEs? Usually, I think I have seen that before, but usually it's critiquing an article or an opinion piece. Yeah, but I've seen a lot of bad LTEs that I would have liked to respond to, but usually it doesn't really work that way. Do they like bullet points better? Is that for the pitch? I think is what that question might be about. I do use bullet points sometimes in a pitch. If I have specific facts or numbers that are mentioned in the op-ed, I'll highlight those in bullet points sometimes. But you don't want, you know, more than 3 bullets, and you can write in just really short sentences as well. Dumb question, how do you use hashtags? Not a dumb question. A hashtag is something you use on either Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. And it's a way for folks who are following a specific topic to tag their posts for others who are interested in that specific topic. So I'll just type it in here. You use basically the pound sign, and then you type the hashtag like this. So
Yeah, it's a marketing tool.
yep, it helps ensure that more people will see your post as well. And yeah, you just type it right into the text of your post. Other questions? How local should you aim? That's a really good question. I think, it depends on, I think more local is better in terms of editors like to hear from their own community. So if you live in Sacramento, definitely write to the Sacramento Bee. But if you live, and the other thing is too, with the Sacramento Bee, more people would see that because it has a higher circulation than a suburban. So usually what I would recommend folks do is actually try the higher profile outlet first, the outlet that has more circulation first. As long as you live within that metro area. But then if that doesn't work, go for your smaller, even more local paper, because they'll have fewer submissions and it's more likely to be published there. But when op-eds, I always say aim high if you've got, a connection to that area. LTEs can address events not written up in a newspaper. I'm glad, Mike, that you mentioned that. So one thing you can do with an LTE as well is say if the newspaper hasn't, say, given enough coverage to a topic or a piece of, policy or an action or an event or climate change event, call them out on that. LTEs are also a good way to call out the newspaper as well and say, it's surprising to me that the newspaper didn't cover this, and here's why.
Or
all right, we've got some great hashtags here. Other questions? I heard somebody come off mute.
I would just say call them in. Invite them to talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Positive.
Yes, thank you. Yeah. Other questions, thoughts?
Sarah, one of the things I really like that you did, and I wrestle with it a lot, is when you make something personal, sometimes it can come off as, well, this affects me, and you're not really thinking about the bigger picture and other people. So when you provided that example about the bus and the lady with asthma, she did talk about students who might have asthma too, but I think a lot of people could go and say, well, look, asthma doesn't affect me. And as unfortunate as that is, to think just about those who have a particular challenge, to extend it. I get where you want to be personal. On the other hand, I think extending it to a wider audience, I think helps make it sound as though, look, I do in fact care about others than myself or the group I'm a part of that has a struggle with a particular circumstance like, global warming. But anyway, so I like that, because I sometimes I guess I feel that people are, unless it affects them personally, they don't care. And that's unfortunate, but I think that letter tried to do that, to extend it not just to people with asthma and not just to her, but to a wider audience.
Right. Yeah. You use your personal experience as a way to touch people's hearts and reach people's hearts, and also to establish your own credibility. But then, like you say, it's very important to then think about, well, what does my audience care about? And bring in other important facts and data and information that will appeal to a broader set of people reading as well. How could we use this approach to battle the corporate interests that seem overwhelming in supporting the status quo? You can also write opinions about corporate action as well. So I talked a lot about policies from city councils or Congress, because that's what I work on every day, and so that's always in my mind. But you can also use an opinion piece to call for a major corporation to do something or not do something. So for instance, right now there's a big campaign to get big banks to stop financing pipelines. So the call to action could be, Wells Fargo, stop financing these pipelines because they're destroying our climate. And it's bad for people who invest in your bank because these are going to be stranded assets. So you can use the same method to target corporate actions. And those are very, very powerful because corporations are very sensitive to bad PR. And so a strong opinion piece that talks about a corporation, Amazon, and their plastic waste problem, or, any other corporate bad actor who could improve. You can, the same way you would call on Congress to take an action, or your city council or your state legislature, you can do the exact same thing with a major corporation. And you can, if you're a customer, you can say that, and that gives you some credibility. Or if you're going to say, I'm not going to buy any longer, I have taken my money elsewhere, I've taken my money to a credit union, or I'm no longer using Amazon or whatever, that's also very, very powerful. Very good question. Other questions, thoughts? I see Mike. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to let you know that because of my, over the years, writing letters to the editor and guest viewpoints, they asked me to submit a monthly column in an expanded version of their community voices. And we picked threads of activism so I can really concentrate on all forms of activism, not just dealing with climate. I've had 3 submissions already.
That is the most wonderful outcome you could hope for from submitting an opinion piece.
It's a small local paper. It only publishes twice a week, but local newspapers are very important for our efforts.
Absolutely, absolutely. So much you can really, really reach people through those local papers. And I think so much of climate action is local. There's so much that can be done locally. So it's so important. Yeah, that's a really awesome example of, what can happen if you write consistently good opinion pieces. Well, did you learn anything? I hope so. I hope it was helpful. Good. I'm looking forward to seeing all of your opinion pieces and your letters to the editor.
Okay, well, I guess we can close out. Yeah, Mike is one of our super activists in his community. He and his wife and other community members he's recruited are, I don't know if they're still doing it, but every Friday they're out on the corner with their signs in front of city council. So he's kind of a superhero activist and really inspirational. So, okay, I guess first and foremost, Sarah, I want to say thank you to you, first of all, for graciously sharing your considerable experience with us. I love the emphasis on structure, the powerful little tips and reminders, and your everyday efforts on climate change with energy innovation. Also, thanks to you, our members and guests, for your participation and your financial support of ECA, without which ECA might not be the community it is. ECA will resume its more traditional national call on Tuesday, September 28th, with Nathaniel Stinnett, founder of the Environmental Voter Project, the fight for our planet and democracy and against voter suppression continues. So we hope to see you next month. And with that, good night.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a really pleasure to be with you.